Hi, welcome back. Today we're going to be practicing high squat, or a lot of times it's called goddess pose. So this is considered a hip opener and also a squat pose. But I see it often, and what happens is people are not prepping for this posture, are not really practicing it appropriately, and so they're not really benefiting from the hip opening or from the squats, to say the least. So I'm going to show you some tweaks and tips to hopefully help you practice this pose more effectively. So first thing to look at is stride length. So one of two things. When Lainey steps her feet out, I call it an A-frame style. So it's not your straddle, it's not your hips distance, it's kind of right in between. And then I always have my students do a check squat. So she's just going to bend her knees and just kind of check to see how that feels. And so as we get ready to prepare and set up for high squat, and I may use goddess and high squat interchangeably, so just know I'm still talking about the same pose. Lainey's going to turn her feet comfortably out. If you're from a more traditional yoga tradition or lineage, I want you just to be very mindful. This idea of like a sharp 30 or sharp 45-degree angle, especially with the foot, is just not realistic. We are not cookie cutter. All of our bodies are very unique and very different. And so if you instead give people a little bit more of an open cue, like turn your feet out to an angle, they will automatically, almost unconsciously, turn their feet out to an appropriate angle. And I want to caution you as a teacher that if you have really open hips like I do, and you turn your feet way open, guess what your students are going to probably try to do? And as they try to turn their feet out way farther than what theirs can actually go, they're going to end up putting a lot of pressure in their knees, which we're going to talk about in a second. So as Lainey turns her feet out to an appropriate angle, she's going to check squat again. So exhaling, coming down. So if Lainey stays for a moment, you can tell that either one of two things. Her stride is either maybe a hair too long, or she needs to angle her feet more forward, because when she squats, her knees are dumping in. So if you look from an aerial view when you do that on yourself, if your knees are collapsing in, all of the pressure and gravity is hitting the knee joint, rather than hitting through the knee into the ankle, which that shin then and all those muscles kind of take the brunt of that. That's where we want to keep that weight. So if Lainey check squats again, perfect. It has to be a nice gauge as to how far the feet should be open, dependent on how open or restrictive your hips are. So a good rule of thumb is that if you have more open hips, your feet will probably be more rotated out. If you have more restricted or tight hips, inner groin-wise, your feet are probably going to be more forward. I always like to tell my students that I have more open hips, so they already kind of have in their head, okay, her feet, are out for a reason like that, because that's how our body is built. So just some food for thought. All right, so nice. Lainey's going to come back upright again, and she's going to check her neutral pelvis. So pubis bone, hip bones run parallel with the front wall, front ribs are relaxed down. Now nice deep breath in, exhale, slide down the imaginary wall behind you, and I want you to think about sitting back a little bit more into your heels than into your knees and into your ankles. So your body is upright in high squat. You're not necessarily on an angle in high squat. Push firmly now through the balls of the feet, almost like you're going to lift your heels. And as a little bit of fun and flavor in this pose, you could challenge your students to try to lift their heels in high squat. You're going to notice a lot more calf work, which is not always a bad thing, and a lot more hamstring and glute work. So just a nice variation of this pose. Lainey can drop her heels down. Awesome. And so as she stays in this pose, inhaling through the nose, pushing firmly into the balls of the feet, exhaling, and she's trying to contract those pelvic floor muscles. And in from the pelvic floor, her front core as well. So remember again, if the hip flexors are tight, the pelvis is going to dump. You need to turn the feet more forward so you keep the lower back nice and long. Awesome. So what can she do for some variations in this posture? Even though just holding this is challenging enough as it is, she could bring her arms into cactus, palms face in. So imagine like kind of curling in on the bicep, really having a nice toned arm. She could extend her arms up alongside her ears and even interlace the fingers. And as she reaches up through her pointer finger, she's going to sit her hips down, kind of this pulley effect. She could try coming into eagle arms, one arm under, one arm over. And I would say try holding this posture, 5 breaths. They could come up and out and then swing the arms around for the other side. And as she's in this eagle, her hips go down, elbows pull up and out. So she gets this great back stretch. Awesome. To come out of this pose, I would simply have her rise up, arms come up, and then exhale back into the squat. She's going to switch and do the opposite arm. So it's a nice little break on the quads and glutes. Awesome. And as she's here in high lunge, something to remember. If we're not pushing into the balls of the feet and you're feeling a lot of gripping with your quads like they're killing you, you're not using your glutes and your hamstrings. In a squat, you should be a forklift, not a crane. You want the underside muscles, not the above muscles, to really be kicking into high gear. All right, so final variation that you could play with in this pose is arms are going to come out to T, and she could come into a side lunge. So exhale, bringing one forearm to the thigh, trying to stay anchored into the hips, and then reaching through the fingertips. If the shoulder feels locked up, you could easily reach to the ceiling. But if you're reaching alongside the ear, one thing I want you to watch for as a teacher and as a student is it's an external rotation on the arm. So the arm is rolling into the face as you roll open to the ceiling. That's going to create a nice opening on the upper back. She can inhale, come back to center and squat, and then exhale to the opposite side. Again, sitting back into the hips, breathing into the side lung, minimal pressure on the bottom thigh. This is a challenging, but definitely an approachable posture. Inhale, arms come back to T. And then exhale, arms drop down. Inhale, slowly rise. Awesome. As a nice counter pose, lady could kick your heels out and just come into a modest standing straddle forward bend. Great job.